So I run a show, and a lot of my focus is Biden versus Trump. If you look at my shorts, if you look at my longs, if you look at my live streams, I spend a lot of time talking about the election. It's an election year, it's interesting. And people are very divided on who they're going to vote for. Now, I don't really promote one candidate over the other. I encourage conversation on both sides. You want to vote Trump? You want to vote Biden? Hang on. You want to vote Trump or Biden? Vote your choice. I just want people to vote. But what I do like to do is get into a conversation about why you're voting for the candidate who you are. And we get some pretty interesting conversations here. I think one of the advantages you'll see in this channel is people from both sides are welcome to bring their points of view. So this is not a partisan show. You want to sit here and you want to advocate for Trump, you want to advocate for Biden, go right ahead. That's part of the fun of this show. That's part of the fun of the election process, is that everybody's got one vote. But sometimes questions pop up and they're worth drilling into. And this is what we had last time. Specifically, one of the people who was in the channel had a very specific question. He wanted to know, why do black people always vote Democratic? And I kind of related a story to him about like my experiences, but in terms of the history of why black people have voted Democratic, I didn't go as far into it as I wanted to. We're going to fix that tonight, because tonight we're going to talk more about black voters, what they've historically done, what it looks like might happen this election year, and most importantly, why. I mean, let's face it, black people have historically voted Democratic. You can go back. I actually did some stuff. I looked all the way, way back. I was having some fun with this. So if you go all the way back to Eisenhower, most black people voted Democratic. But what you'll see is Democrats didn't really have the stronghold on the black vote that they do now. You can see over time how things changed, and that's part of what we're going to be looking at. Before we do all of that, let's just kind of frame some. Oh, okay, I always have to remember this. Before we dive into this, click like, click subscribe, click the notification bell. I tend to do pop-up lives, so if you want to be notified when a show happens, have the notification bell checked. You'll get the invite. You'll be able to participate. That said, let's kind of start off with something simple. If you look at elections, about 90% of black voters choose Democrats. Now that's, there's a plus or minus, 1 year it's a little higher, 1 year it's a little lower, but generally about 90% of black voters choose Democrats. Now, that's not all the black voters. I mean, let's face it. That means that roughly 10% of black voters are voting for Republicans. And you can look year over year. It doesn't really seem to matter who the candidate is. Every year, okay, this light's getting to me. Every year, you're going to see some black voters who are voting for Republicans. But to get into why that is, I think we kind of have to take a step back. Because when we're talking about the black vote, kind of the first question you need to ask is, well, what exactly is the black vote? I mean, what does that mean? If one candidate says, hey, I like black people, and the other one doesn't, does that mean that's the black vote? I don't think it's that simple. I also don't think that black people are all rallying behind the same cause. So when we're talking about the black vote, I don't think there's like a one-size-fits-all strategy that Biden or Trump could use to try to convert people to their cause. I think there are a lot of things that are going on. And I'll tell a story that I told last time because it helps to explain kind of my situation growing up and how I thought about elections when I was a little kid. But it also explains what a lot of other black people are thinking about. And my story was this. See, JG, Well, JG, you're saying this is racist. What does skin color have to do with anything? So here's what I'll say, JG. My question, the question I want to talk about today is, what does skin color have to do with everything? I'm being serious too. I don't think that's, well, I don't think that all black people have the same issues. I don't think all black people vote for the same issues. But I do recognize that 90% of black people vote Democratic. That's a fact. So if someone wants to understand, well, why is that? Or if someone's wondering what it would take to motivate more black people to vote Republican, well, I think that's a legitimate conversation to have. You may disagree, and I invite you to provide your questions, but 90% of black people do vote Democratic, so it's fair to ask the question why. But kind of back to the story. So when I was a kid, I grew up in Texas, and where I grew up, every black person I knew voted Democratic. That was just what it was. I'll come back to your question in just a second. That was something I associated with being black, was voting Democratic. We all were Southern Baptist. We all voted Democratic. We all lived in, primarily in predominantly black communities. Those are just, kind of the ties that bound us together. I never really thought about the Republican Party as a representative party, because to me, the Republican Party was the party of the rich. So if you weren't rich, you didn't vote Republican. And that was about as much thought as I gave to it as a little kid. And as I got a little older, I started to think about the party for myself. I started to think about policies, and I started to wonder, well, who has the best policies for me? I'm not voting party, I'm voting policy. And if one party or another has better policies, well, I'm going to let that be what dictates how I vote. But I'm not just going to sit back and say I'm automatically voting for one party or the other. I know I got a lot of things beeping right now. Let me see if I can shut this off, turn that down. Okay. But I'm not just going to vote for a party because that's historically what we've always done. That seemed like a kind of a naive concept. And that was when I started just thinking for myself about parties and alignment and what I wanted to do. And to further that story, there was an interview where Charles Barkley, famous Charles Barkley, was talking about a conversation he had with his mother. And he was telling his mother that he was voting Republican in an upcoming election. Now, his mother scolded him because she said, "What are you doing? The Republican Party is the party for the rich." And Barkley said, "Well, Mom, I am rich." Now, it's funny because his story reinforced a lot of the ideas that I had at the time when I was a kid. The Republican Party was the party for the rich. What was Barkley saying? He was a Democrat who finally made it, and now that he was rich, he was a Republican. His mother was scolding him because she still didn't identify as being rich, so she still didn't identify with the Republican Party. That's some of the baggage that the Republican Party has. It's not the only baggage, but it's going to be part of the conversation. Now I want to come back to JG. You're the one talking about the black vote. You're not any different because of skin color. This victimhood mentality is the problem. You're trying to mask with politics. Okay, so here's my question for you, JG. If you're saying that I'm playing the victim, explain to me how. I'm not calling myself a victim at all. I'm simply pointing out a fact. 90% of black people vote Democratic. Whether you like that or not is one thing. I'm just pointing out an issue. I'm pointing out it's not even an issue. It's a reality. 90% of black people vote Democratic. And if we look at why, which is what we're going to do, it can help people understand kind of what's been going on and how things have been changing over time. But, if you have an issue with the facts, can't help you. Facts are the facts. If you want to talk about the facts and what they mean, well, that's kind of what we do here. T-size. That's how I was taught as a kid. Stay black and stay thinking and stay strong. I think that's how most black people are being taught about elections. Like, if you're black, you vote Democratic. What did Joe Biden famously idiotically said, if you're black, you're going to vote for the Democrat. If you don't vote for me, you're not black. Something stupid like that. Um, he was leaning into this superstition that black people have about who they should vote for. Wasn't the smartest thing to say. I mean, he retracted it, but he retracted it because it didn't ring the way he wanted it to. But it still hits on the point. Black people predominantly vote Democratic. But if we're talking about the black vote, I'm going to tell you something really simple. I don't really know what the black vote means. Not in 2024. If somebody could explain that, I would love it, because when I hear the black vote, I hear a lot of people talk about it in a lot of different ways. Some make sense to me and some don't. HBCUs. If somebody's funding HBCUs and somebody's not, well, okay, that's nice. But I graduated college. My kid's not of college age, and she's probably not going to an HBCU. So your support of HBCUs isn't really something that's going to impact my pocket personally. Not going to change the way I vote. If we're talking about urban cities, again, I don't live in the inner city. So if your focus is the inner city, doesn't mean anything to me. If I'm looking for someone to vote for, I'm looking for someone who's going to put money in my pocket. I vote my personal bank account. And whoever I think is going to do the best job of improving my personal bank account is the guy who's going to get my vote. But that's me. For some people, the economics, the belief about the perceptions of how inclusive or exclusive the party is, or frankly, just the way somebody talks when they're talking about kind of the black community and how they relate to the black community, is what drives a lot of their voting. If you talk to a lot of people who are talking about who they're going to vote for, it's funny. Because what you'll hear a lot of people talking about isn't policy, it's more identity. They'll sit back and they'll say things like, well, Trump had some unfair practices in how he gave out housing loans back in the day. Or they'll talk about the Brooklyn Five. And that becomes the whole approach they take to voting. This person did something specific that I don't like in regards to the black community, and so I'm not voting for them. When a lot of people who are anti-Biden talk about him, they'll talk about his whole, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black statement. Nothing to do with policy, everything to do with identity. A lot of people are voting black because they vote on identity, not policy. I don't fault people for how they vote. Everybody's got to vote their conscience. For me, that I'm not voting on anything but policy. However, when you're talking about the black vote, it's important to understand that that is part of it. How do these candidates talk about me? Do they make me feel like I'm included or not? That's a very big part of what's driving a lot of black voters. And you'll see this if you look at some of the popular voices now on social media. You'll find people who are streaming, and there are candidates who are generating big numbers in terms of lots of subscribers. They've got very popular shows, big advocates for Trump. There are candidates who have huge platforms, lots of subscribers, and they are advocating being independent, which I think is silly. And then there are candidates with big voices who are advocating for Biden. But generally speaking, the ones who are independent, the ones who are Biden, are more often advocating for identity voting. This is the candidate who we feel is best for black people. Let me frame this up in a way that I think people can understand. I don't know a situation that's going to lead Trump or Biden to implement any kind of policy that is specifically designed to harm black people. I don't think that that's going to happen. I don't see how it could happen. So I'm not so much worried about which candidate is doing more for black people. I want to know which candidate's doing more for America. And if I feel like one candidate's putting us in a better position than the other, well, guess what? That's the candidate I'm voting for. I don't see how voting for America and voting for black America diverge. Some people do, but I haven't really heard that articulated very well. It's just one person makes me feel more included than another, therefore that's who I vote for. And that's not what that's not personally what I advocate, but I respect people's opinions on that matter. But the other thing starts to get into kind of the black vote and like, what is the black vote? What does that mean from an election standpoint? Now, let's reflect on where we are with this election. The 2024 election is basically a rematch of 2020. So if the exact same people go to the polls and they vote the exact same way, we're going to have the exact same outcome that we had in 2020. Biden's going to have a little bit over 300 electoral votes. Trump's going to have a little bit over 230 electoral votes. That's just the math. Question becomes, what's going to happen to potentially change who's voting or how they're voting? Focusing on the black vote can help, but here's an interesting fact, okay? Most black people in America are concentrated in like 7 or 8 states. You got California, start with the big ones. California, New York, Texas. Then it's like Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, Illinois, Tennessee, and Philly. Okay, so let's say those 9 states. That's about 60%, a little bit over 60% of the black population. 9 states, 60%. If you were trying to win the black vote, how much effort are you going to put into the other 41 states when you know there are 9 states that have like 60% of the black population in them? And here's the other part to think about. Of those states I mentioned, how many of them are actually swing states? We know right now California is going to go Democratic. We know right now that Texas is going to go Republican. Georgia, most likely going Republican this race, but Georgia's a battleground state, so make no bones about it. If I was focusing on the black vote, I would be putting effort into what I'm doing in Georgia to swing voters, because in Georgia it's going to matter. Philadelphia, that's potentially a swing state. I don't think that the Republicans can win Philly, but they did well enough there last time that Philly's worth fighting for. If they were able to convert black voters, sure, they could win Philly. And if Trump wins Georgia and Philly, he wins the election. That's just the math. However, you don't have to convert the whole state. You don't need to convert Pennsylvania. You just need to convert Philadelphia. What do we have? Sanjay. Okay, so we got the trolls are here. Welcome aboard. We're going to keep running the show. So we're not talking about needing to convert a whole nation to get some black voters. We're talking about like a Georgia and like a Pennsylvania. Convert those. Essentially, that's the black vote as far as an election goes. Can it be done? Yeah, maybe. But do I think Trump's going to lose Georgia? No. Do I think Biden's going to lose Pennsylvania? No. So even in the 2 swing states where you've got a black population, you still have to ask the question, how much effort is it worth to convert black voters in those states? Because I kind of already know which way those states are going to go. It's not to say that black issues don't matter, but it is to say that from the standpoint of where you put your effort, you want to put your effort behind things that are actually going to change outcomes. Georgia is a state where you need to change an outcome. Pennsylvania is a state where you need to change an outcome. And Michigan is a state where you very likely want to change an outcome. Um, I've said this before, but I think that on election night, 8 p.m., we're going to know who the president is because Michigan is going to get called at roughly 8 p.m. We'll know where they stand. And given the way the states progress to that point, Michigan is going to be make or break. If Trump wins Michigan, he's going to win the election. If he loses Michigan, it's over because we know the way the rest of the nation is going to vote for the most part. So it's just a matter of waiting for all the other states to get called. But if Idaho suddenly votes Democratic, that would be a blockbuster of a surprise. It's not going to happen. If Washington suddenly voted Republican, again, that would be a blockbuster of a surprise. It's not going to happen. We know how these states are going to vote. So it's really just going to boil down to those couple of states and what happens in those couple of states. But back to kind of how the black vote matters in there. For some of it, it gets into identity, and I don't think either president has been perfect in that regard. I know that in Trump's case, he's been asked questions about kind of his approach to the African American community, and he would always focus on kind of the urban areas, the inner city, and I would think, well, I can't really relate to this. I don't live in the inner city. Sure, I live in an urban area, but it's kind of borderline urban suburban, and I just don't relate to the world. If you're talking crime and turning crime around and improving unemployment, that's not what I see every day in the community that I live in. If you're talking about economic growth, okay, now I can pay attention to that. That's something I can understand. But it's important to keep in mind, just talking about black people from the standpoint of urban inner city doesn't speak to a lot of people. For Biden, I mean, a lot of his change. Biden's approach has been very inclusive. To the point, he supports a lot of social programs, some more popular than others. For some black people, he's a little bit too inclusive. As you think, you know what? Some of the things you're getting into are things that I'm not comfortable with. And I don't fault anybody for believing what they believe. I think that that's part of being an American, is being able to make the choice for yourself. The point there, though, is from an identity standpoint, Trump and Biden have opportunities to do better. I don't think either one of them is necessarily going to convert a lot of black people with their approach. They may lose some people. It kind of depends on what they do in the coming months. But really what we're talking about is who can hold on to the voters in Georgia, who can hold on to the voters in Pennsylvania, and who's going to take Michigan. But I want to point something out because it's funny when we talk about the black vote. Someone was asking the question, why are black voters so loyal to the Democratic Party? And I did this long look, so I'm not going to bore you with all of the numbers, but here's the thing that was very interesting to me about the black vote. Black people weren't so overwhelmingly Democratic if you go way, way back. There was a tipping point where everything changed. I mean, it's hard to get accurate numbers on the percent of black voters who voted Democrat versus Republican. If you try to look past like Eisenhower, which admittedly is pretty far back. That's just because you had a lot of Jim Crow was in effect. There were a lot of things going on. Black people couldn't vote as freely as they do today. So trying to understand how many black voters there were, how many of them were voting for Democrats versus Republicans, that gets hard. But here's what we can say. Here's what we can say. If you look at the black vote, going back, this was Dwight D. Eisenhower. So this is like 1952 and 1956. Eisenhower had about 20% of the black vote, and then he got up to about 40% of the black vote. So 40% of black people were voting Republican way back in the Eisenhower days. So to the idea, black people have always voted Democratic, well, that's not true. Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. Republicans and civil rights, civil positions have heavily influenced who black people vote for. So through Eisenhower, the Republican Party had a lot of black voters. Still, a few more on the Democratic side, but let's face it, Eisenhower's second term, 40% of the black vote, that's not bad numbers. That's the highest it's been. That's the highest recorded it's been. But here's what happened, and here's where things changed. Because let's start thinking about what's going on there. So you got the 50s and the 60s, and you have the civil rights movement that's coming in. There's the abolition of Jim Crow, and Jim Crow was, among other things, a series of laws that made it harder for black people to vote. Lots of weird rules, like, oh, you're gonna, was your grandfather a voter? If not, you can't vote. Take a literacy test. Pay a charge to vote. Lots of little rules that were designed to kind of prohibit black people from voting. So that was in effect. All of those rules were getting voted out by Democrats. And that's really the key, because that's where we see the turning point. If you want to point to one person and say, who's the one person who most hurt the who most hurt Republicans and the black voting base? All right, see if this jogs your memory. Barry Goldwater. Yep, Barry Goldwater ran 1964. Ran against Lyndon B. Johnson. And here's Barry Goldwater's problem. One of Barry's platforms, this is where Barry made his mistake, and this is where Barry cost the Republican Party a lot of black votes. He essentially made part of his campaign a racial issue. Civil rights were coming in, and black people were getting their right to vote, and it was being protected. And Goldwater came out with what he called his Southern strategy. His Southern strategy was, he said, I want states to be able to decide what they want to do. I want states to be able to kind of control their approach to the elections. And what it was really getting at was, he wanted Southern states to be able to decide for themselves who could and couldn't vote. Barry Goldwater was not focusing on an inclusive environment where everybody had the chance to vote. He pushed pretty hard on his Southern strategy, and he had an interesting campaign. Barry Goldwater used very nasty campaign dynamics. He talked about, he would use kind of smear campaigns. You want to see where, big time smear campaigns are starting? Go take a look at Barry Goldwater. Big Zone 401, am I the new professor? I wouldn't say that. This is just, somebody had a specific question about the black vote. And okay, when you get into a specific question, then I like to get into the details of the answer. Usually the shows I don't make shows that are designed to be academic. But this one is more specific. It's like, okay, this other guy had a specific question about why black people vote so overwhelmingly Democratic. And the only way to really do that is to talk about what happened. So, what you had was Barry Goldwater, and he was pushing for states' rights. Oh, and while I remember, click like, click subscribe, click the notification bell, so when I do my pop-up lives, you'll see them, and you'll be notified, so you can join in. Okay. So, now we got Barry Goldwater, and he's basically anti-civil rights. And the Republican Party suddenly got identified, because of Barry Goldwater, as the party that wasn't for civil rights. They didn't advocate for black people being able to vote. And that's when you saw this huge turn in who black people were voting for. Goldwater got destroyed in his election against Johnson. I mean, he won his home state. He won like a handful of southern states, but Johnson had like over 400 electoral votes. It was a landslide victory. And after that, what happened is the Democratic Party became associated with civil rights. The Republican Party became associated with being anti-civil rights. Tommy Brown Jr., Trump 2024, MAGA. Trump's got a chance. I am not. I mean, I don't advocate for or against public. I encourage people to vote. Trump definitely has a chance to win in 24, but his work is cut out for him because let's face it, Biden won 2020. For Trump to win 2024, he's got to win Georgia, which he should, but then he's got to win Michigan, which I think he's behind on. I think Biden standing on that picket line might have won Biden Michigan. So it'll be interesting to see how that shapes up. But yeah, Trump can win, but he's going to need to figure out how to win Michigan because if he can't win Michigan, I don't think he can win the election. Feel free to disagree with that. So part of what you see though, kind of going back to Barry Goldwater, Barry didn't want black people to vote, and that was kind of one of the platforms he ran on. And when he got destroyed in the election against Johnson, you suddenly saw this huge shift where black people started overwhelmingly voting for Democrats. And from then until now, that's basically been the case. I mean, if you look before Goldwater, black people were 20 to 40% in some of the elections that we talked about, Republican. After that, it never really got above 15%. There's only 15%. A couple of, the further back in history you go, the more black Republicans there were. You move forward in history, the numbers just keep dropping. And that's part of it. Part of it is this whole notion, it goes back to that identity. Who do black people see as the candidate that they can identify with? Well, and this is the reality. For some, it's my grandparents voted Democrat because they lived through civil rights. They raised my parents to be Democrats. My parents raised me to be Democrats. That's kind of what happens to a lot of people. It just becomes the tradition. And tradition is hard to break. I gotta take a sip. Good stuff. Speaking of tradition, I met some family in Germany. When I met them, they introduced me to this beer. I'm not going to advertise them. They can pay me for that. But ever since then, that beer becomes a staple. I probably about 60% of the time if I buy a beer, it's that beer. Because it reminds, it's tradition. It reminded me of the time that I met some family members. Stephen Tracy has a question, but I'm not sure what your question is. So yeah, if you look at blacks and how they voted Republican, here's the thing that's funny. Ronald Reagan had huge by modern standards, black support. He had about 15% of the black vote in his first run, down to like 9% his second time. George Bush Sr., he had that 12%, 10%. So again, huge support from the black community. But over time, those numbers dwindle down. And when you look at everybody else, Trump's got like almost 10% of the black vote. He had about 8% for when he ran against Hillary. He had about 9% when he ran against Biden. What do I think he's going to have this time? I don't know. It's about 9%. Trump might be able to convert some voters. I'm just looking historically. He had 8% and 9%. And I think his numbers are going to be about the same this time as they were before. Can Trump win black voters in Georgia? I don't know. If he wants to win Georgia, he needs to have, I think he'll win Georgia. I think just telling people to vote by mail, he's going to get enough votes to carry Georgia. But if he wants to guarantee Georgia, yeah, If I was him, I would go to Atlanta. You don't have to do the whole state. You need to go to Atlanta. You need to have a message for black people that motivates a small percentage of them to kind of come over to the Republican side. You do that, you take Georgia. Can Trump take Philly? I don't. Can he take Pennsylvania? I don't think so. But to take Pennsylvania, he's got to take Philly. I don't see it in Philly. Philly's governor is a Democrat. He's anti-Trump, and he seems to have a lot of support. And I think that's going to cost Trump Philly. But Michigan, oh, let's say Michigan is still up for grabs. I think Trump's a little behind on Michigan right now, but he's not out of it in Michigan. He just has to. He needs to figure out a strategy to overcome where Biden is. So yeah, it's funny because when you think about where black people are in America, how black people are concentrated in like 7 or 8 states, and only 2 of those states are going to be swing states. Like focusing on the black vote, it makes sense kind of from what I'll call optics standpoint, which means it looks good to go after it, but I don't know how much sense it makes to put a whole lot of effort behind it. Focus on a campaign that works for America, and for the most part, as long as your campaign focuses on America, you're going to bring along black voters. That's just how it works. I don't know. Right. Back when civil rights was an issue, sure, you could kind of have one issue that rallied all the black people together because everybody wanted to vote. Everybody wanted, equal education, equal opportunity. But now there's not really an idea that rallies the whole black vote. You want to get black voters, you have to focus on voters. Like what are the issues that voters care about? If you've got the best idea for voters on how you're going to make America strong, you're going to get black voters, white voters, you'll get all kinds of voters. Focusing on HBCUs or something like that, that might get a couple of people, but that's not going to be what overwhelmingly draws people to your side. And that's what we're really talking about here is what do you have that's going to overwhelmingly draw people to your side? I think Trump's issues on America can help him to win some voters. Most of the people who I've seen who are pundits will generally say that Trump's got better domestic policy and Biden's got better foreign policy. From what I've gathered, it's kind of interesting because I think it just depends on how you look at the situation. I've got arguments for and against both. For example, when you look at Trump and energy, I don't fault Trump for wanting to have more drilling happening in America. But I'll also acknowledge that it's not critical for us to start drilling right now. So if I'm looking at that issue, what's in my mind is, well, drilling creates more American jobs. Yes, a strong economy will help everyone. As an idea, I like it. I like for America to improve. But it's kind of funny because, well, let's say strong economy for a second. Hypothetically, if we created a lot of jobs and they were jobs on the coast, that's great for the people on the coast, but if I live in the heartland, that doesn't help me. So someone could say the economy's better, but I would think, well, my situation didn't improve, so I don't care. However, I would rather see Americans with jobs than without. And so if I'm looking at drilling and I'm saying, if we drill, that creates some jobs. If we don't, then what are we doing? We're just leaving that oil in the ground. I'd rather have the jobs than not. On that, yeah, that's something that I understand Trump's position on. But I'll admit, I understand Biden's position. I don't know if I agree with him on this. Actually, I don't agree with him on this, but I understand his position. Biden's, he's pushing the whole climate change agendas. So he wants to be part of the Paris Accord, and it's a bad look to start drilling and then to also push to get into the Paris Accord. So I understand why he's not drilling. Do I think that do I think that it's the right idea? I don't know. So here's a funny thing. This is a very funny issue about climate change, and I'm not sure. I used to be a big advocate. I saw the big, inconvenient truth, and I thought, oh my gosh, look at this climate change stuff, and I was really positive about it until I started doing my own research, and then I started to have questions because number one, if I looked at that movie, An Inconvenient Truth, and I just carried along the timeline, I'd say, well, wait a minute. If everything you said in this movie was true, the temperature on Earth should be a whole lot higher than it is right now. I mean, just the way you took your timeline, the way you stood on that crane and you talked about how things were going, we should be going through kind of some of the hottest temperatures we've ever experienced, and we're not. I mean, I look at the news and they'll say, hey, it's 102 today. It hasn't been this hot since 1940. And I'll think, well, wait a minute. That means it's been this hot before. We're not really setting records. Sometimes we have some hot days, sometimes we have some cold days. This is inconsistent with my thoughts on what we should be experiencing if everything they said about climate change is true. And here's a funny fact. I mean, I looked this up. If you look at the temperature on Earth and you go from now to like 100 years ago, the temperature on Earth from 100 years ago is like less than 2 degrees lower than it is now. So in 100 years, the temperature's risen like less than 2 degrees Fahrenheit. All of this is inconsistent with the ideas that were brought up in Inconvenient Truth, where it suggested that things were accelerating, kind of out of control. I'm not sitting here saying that climate change doesn't exist. I'm just saying that I've got questions about climate change when I look at kind of what people are saying climate change is doing, and what I can see with my own two eyes when I look outside, when I check the weather, when I look historically at the weather. It's like not everything that was described in the story is happening, and so now I got to go back and look at the story and start asking some questions for myself. It was also interesting that some people will know what ChatGPT is. If you don't, I strongly encourage you to take a look at it. ChatGPT is like a search engine, but it's better than Google. If you go to Google with a question, Google will give you a bunch of websites to go to do your research. If you go to ChatGPT with a question, ChatGPT will just spit out the answer. So you don't have to like click through websites and figure out which one has the best information. It just tells you here's the answer to your question, and I like that. But ChatGPT has problems. ChatGPT is woke, and I'll tell you what I mean. I went to ChatGPT because I wanted to understand this whole climate change issue. And I said, you know what? Give me all the arguments for climate change. Give me all the arguments against climate change. I want to see what the information is, and then I want to make my own conclusion. ChatGPT gave me all the reasons for why climate change is real. And when it came to all the issues for why climate change is not real, it said, I can't take that question seriously. Climate change is too big an issue for me to pretend like it's not. And I thought, wait a minute. You're a computer. You're not supposed to have an opinion. You're just supposed to spit out facts. I make my own decision. I'll come up with an opinion. You give me the facts. I'll decide what they mean. Doesn't do that. And that's where problems start to arise. That's where you start looking at politics and how kind of the partisan nature that we've fallen into with everything starts messing it all up. You can't have an honest conversation because you can't even go to a website and get information that's going to help you make a decision about an issue. The website is biased and they're spinning a narrative. Definitely can't go to a news network because you tell me the news network, you tell me the candidate, I can tell you the story. Fox News, Trump's going to be a positive spin. Fox News, Biden, going to be a negative spin. MSNBC, Trump, negative. Biden, positive. I don't have to see the story to know what the story is going to be telling me. And that's just part of That's part of how broken things have become, where you can't trust your news sources anymore because they're not giving you news; they're giving you entertainment. Um, Let me see. Marie Anna, welcome, Marie. I remember when Democrats used to say Trump will bring us to war. He won't get along with anyone. Well, as soon as Biden got on power, Russia was like, this is the perfect time. And also Hamas. Bless you for being strong in what you stand for. Not many people can do that. I agree with you, Marie. And actually, to anybody who's in, click like, click subscribe, and click the notification bell for more. Part of what we do, the world has become so PC that things have become kind of silly. We can't make honest observations anymore. Like, I can't look at someone and say, dude, what you said was stupid, because maybe I offend them. Oh, maybe they feel like I'm making a personal attack at them, and their lifestyle. And nobody wants to be guilty of discriminating against anybody. So we start to let all kinds of things slide because nobody wants to be guilty of offending. The problem is sometimes things get so weird that you're being offended. Like, I don't have a problem with you living your life, but I'm going to live my life too. And if I want to disagree with you, well, I'm going to. So if you think that climate change is an absolute thing, that's fine. That's your choice. If I want to say I've got questions, I don't want somebody in my face treating me like I'm a knucklehead because I don't agree with them on climate change. That just doesn't make sense. It's funny. We talk about foreign policy. Mitt Romney did this interview. I think it was for MSNBC. But it was very interesting because he was talking about the Ukraine. And the way he positioned it, which I appreciate from him, was if you look at Trump versus Biden, I think they both understand the Ukraine situation the same way. The Ukraine, basically he was saying Ukraine is going to lose that war. Throwing tens of millions of dollars at it isn't going to change anything. However, his position was America made a commitment to provide a certain level of funding. So even though you're kind of throwing that money down the hole, what you have to look at is your credibility. If I said I'm going to give you $100 million to help fund your war over 3 years, and I don't do that, I lose credibility. The next time I ask somebody for help, ask somebody to do something, and I tell them I'm going to provide funding, if I didn't, they're going to look and say, no, you're not. We saw what you did in Ukraine. You promised you were going to do that. You didn't. We don't trust you. So that's where I say I can understand both sides, because Trump's position is kind of stop throwing money at a problem you can't fix. And I understand that. Biden's position seems to be we agreed to provide this level of funding, so we have to do that. So I understand that. I understand both. I don't understand fully, because Romney was getting into this notion that if we lose our credibility, China could suddenly become the world leader, not us. Now, this is just me. If we don't send money to Ukraine, I don't know how that positions China to be the world power. They suddenly become the big money lender. I don't see that. I don't think anybody's going to reject your funding if you're offering it. But, he's more in tune with everything that's going on there than I am. I'm not going to pretend like that's not the case. The moral of the story, though, was Trump's position versus Biden's position on it both make sense. So I don't really see a right or a wrong. It's just it's the lesser of the two evils. If Romney's telling me we should, keep our promises, I'm not going to argue against that. I get it. If somebody borrows some money from me, I expect them to pay me back. If I tell somebody I'm going to provide them with some money, they should be able to trust that I'm really going to do what I say. That's just that's part of having the whole gentlemanly agreement that when you say something, I can trust you to actually do it, and I don't have to stay on you making sure you actually deliver against what you said. So that's something to think about. How that plays out, we'll see. No, this election, though, I think this election is going to be particularly interesting just because this is the first time we've had a rematch. This is the first time we can say, look, I know what the Republican candidate did in office. I know what the Democratic candidate did in office. And I'm choosing the candidate that I think is best, not based on their promises. Campaign promises are not always kept. Now, this is based on track record. I can look at Trump's 4 years. I can look at Biden's 4 years. I can look at my bank account, and I can make a decision about who did the better job for me. So, 2024, November, I'm going to be looking forward to seeing what people have to say. I won't be surprised if the election goes the exact same way it did in 2020. I think that's a very real possibility. A lot of people are just going to go to the polls and they're going to do the same thing they did last time. But that's not what everybody's going to do. There will be some group of people who cross party lines. Some Trump supporters are going to vote Biden. Some Biden supporters are going to vote Trump. Question is, who gets more of those people? I think the most interesting thing to think about in this election is what happens with all these independent voters. Because independents get to see the impact of kind of sitting on the sidelines. Let's face it, if the independents picked a side in, let's say Georgia, that could have changed Georgia. Pennsylvania could have changed Pennsylvania. Probably would have changed Pennsylvania. Would have changed Georgia. Arizona, a little different. I have to look at how many independents there were. But the point is, if an independent has an issue that they really want to see addressed, they need to figure out whether Biden or Trump does the best job. Because independents are not, voting independent is not going to win you. You're not going to win as an independent. You're just not. Young Pappy. Who is Young Pappy? I don't know who Young Pappy is. The only candidates who are going to win, who have a shot at winning, are Biden or Trump. There's a very weird scenario where RFK has a chance, but RFK only has an opportunity if he's banking on Trump not being able to run, and he's assuming that he'll be able to win over Republican voters if Trump is somehow not on the ticket. That's like the only way RFK can win. So, anybody else is a wasted vote. Won't win, can't win. That's how that works. King Vaughn. Okay, not sure. King Vaughn. Who's King Vaughn? What is this? What's Young Pappy and King Vaughn? I'm not sure who they are. And while I'm taking a quick sip, click like, click subscribe, click the notification bell if you want to know when the next pop-up live is going to happen. But yeah, this is this is going to be interesting because, let's face it, Michigan is the trick. And the reason I say that is because I think that Biden set up a really good scenario for himself in Michigan, and Trump's going to have to figure out how to overcome it. You'll remember, how long ago was that? Biden stood on a picket line with auto workers in Michigan. This was years ago, and at the time, I didn't understand it. He's president of the United States. He's got better things to do than stand on a picket line. But apparently, he'd figured out way back when that Michigan was a key state that he was going to need to win if he wanted to win the election. And he recognized that auto workers was the way to win the state. So he stood on that picket line. Now, I do think it's a very powerful statement to somebody. They see the president of the United States standing on a picket line right next to them, helping them get their working conditions improved, helping them feed their family. If I was an auto worker and I saw the president standing on the picket line saying, yeah, get these workers better working conditions, yeah, that'd be enough to win my vote. Maybe somebody could come by and offer something that, you know, maybe there's an argument you can make for why I should vote for somebody else. But they'd have to show me something incredible. Like, one guy put money in my pocket, put food on the table for my family. What's the other guy going to do? Unless you've got a very specific plan of action, not a promise, not, I'm coming and we'll put resources. It's like, no, 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 no. You got to tell me specifically what you're going to do that's going to put food on the table, put money in my pocket, gas in the tank. Otherwise, I'm going with the guy who did that. That's my take on Michigan. And that's why I think that the election is going to be so tricky, is because I think Trump's got a couple of things that he's dealing with right now. We got the trolls, JX Ren. I'll leave that for the comment section. I'm not getting into all of that. But yeah, it's going to be an uphill battle for Trump. Just, we know how 2020 ended up. So if he wants to win, he's got to figure that out. Can he? Sure, of course he can. Will he? Well, it's a different question. We got to look at what his plan is. I haven't seen his plan. Doesn't mean he doesn't have one. I just don't know what it is for Michigan. If he doesn't win Michigan, he doesn't win the election. That's my big thing. I want to have my power hour. I had to start late because I was working late. But again, click like, click subscribe, and click the notification bell if you want to know when the pop-up lives are happening. I try to get a couple during the week. It kind of depends on what's going on. Usually, not these academic exercises. This one, I just wanted to answer a question. Somebody asked a specific question about black voters and why they vote Democrat. And I wanted to, and we kind of covered that. It goes back to civil rights and Johnson versus Goldman. Goldman was, or not Goldman, wasn't Goldwater. Johnson versus Goldwater. And Goldwater was kind of anti-civil rights as a Republican. Johnson was pro-civil rights as a Democrat. And that's when we saw that big shift in how black voters voted. They started overwhelmingly voting Democrat and have continued to do so ever since then. So that's the show. Hope you enjoyed it. More to come. Again, like, subscribe, and click the notification bell for more. It's the Last Good Man in Jersey, signing out.